This girl woke up in a hospital, completely clueless, with a millionaire in front of her saying, "Now you're my daughter," as if that wasn't weird enough. 2 days later, something even more sinister happens. Leave a comment and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The strong smell of antiseptic filled Lily's nostrils as she regained consciousness. Her heavy eyelids fluttered open, revealing a sterile white room. Fear gripped her small body as she noticed the various tubes and monitors connected to her delicate skin. Her fragile arms trembled, and she couldn't understand why she was there. The little girl, barely 7 years old, tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. A growing sense of panic washed over her as she realized she couldn't remember anything. Not how she got there, not what had happened before. It was as if her memory was a blank slate. That's when she noticed a man sitting beside her bed. He wore an elegant suit, had silver hair, and an expression that mixed worry and relief. His large, warm hands held Lily's small hand with surprising gentleness. "I'm so glad you're awake, sweetie," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Arthur, and you're safe now." Lily tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The man immediately grabbed a glass of water and helped her take a few sips. The cool water provided momentary relief, but the confusion in her mind remained intense. Where am I?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "You're in the hospital, Lily. I found you passed out on the street 3 days ago," Arthur explained, his eyes welling up with tears. "The doctors ran several tests, but they couldn't find any identification, no documents, nothing." The girl tried to force her memory, searching for any recollection that could explain how she ended up in this situation. But it was like a thick fog covered her entire past. The harder she tried to remember, the more her head ached. I don't remember anything," she murmured, feeling tears begin to stream down her face. Arthur squeezed her hand tighter, as if to convey security through that simple gesture. "Don't worry about that right now. The important thing is that you're okay and—" He paused, seeming to gather courage to continue. "Lily, I've made a decision. I can't leave you alone in the world. I want to take care of you, to be your dad." The girl looked at him with wide eyes, trying to process what she had just heard. A stranger wanted to be her dad. How was that possible? Why would he do that? "I know it must seem scary," he continued, noticing her confusion. "But I promise, I'll do everything to make you happy. I have a big house with plenty of room for a child to play and grow up. You'll have everything you need." Before Lily could respond, a nurse entered the room to check her vitals. The woman smiled kindly as she checked the machines and made notes on her clipboard. "Good to see you awake, honey. Are you feeling better?" Lily just nodded, still stunned by everything that was happening. The nurse adjusted the IV drip and informed them that the doctor would be in soon for an evaluation. When she left, silence returned to the room. Arthur remained by her side, telling stories about his life, trying to make her feel more comfortable with his presence. He talked about his house, about how he had lost his family a few years ago and how he had lived alone ever since. His voice was soft and calm, but Lily sensed a deep sadness in his eyes when he mentioned the past. The hours dragged on that first day. Doctors came in and out of the room, asking questions she couldn't answer, performing tests that made her even more scared. Amid all that whirlwind of emotions and medical procedures, the only constant was Arthur's presence, who didn't leave her side for a moment. When night came, bringing with it the darkness and silence characteristic of hospitals, Lily found herself fighting sleep. She was afraid to fall asleep and wake up alone, to discover that it was all just a confusing dream. Arthur noticed her restlessness and began to sing an old lullaby softly. The gentle melody lulled Lily to sleep, but before she drifted off completely, she felt something strange in her stomach. an uncomfortable sensation, as if something wasn't right. She tried to speak, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. Her eyes closed heavily, and she plunged into a deep and restless sleep, unaware that that feeling was just the beginning of something much more serious. Outside the room, a figure watched the scene through the small window in the door. Veronica, the housekeeper of Arthur's mansion, tightly gripped the strap of her purse as her dark eyes fixed on the small, sleeping form in the bed. Her face, normally serene, was contorted in an expression of contained hatred. No one could imagine that, behind that appearance of a dedicated employee, hid a terrible plan that was just beginning to unfold. 2 days after leaving the hospital, Lily was still trying to adjust to the grandeur of the mansion she now called home. The immense hallways, decorated with expensive paintings and antique furniture, seemed like a labyrinth for her small feet. Each room was the size of an entire house, and the garden that surrounded the property was so extensive that it was lost from sight. The room prepared especially for her was a dream for any child. Walls in soft shades of pink, a princess bed with a canopy, shelves filled with dolls and colorful books. A dollhouse the size of her occupied one of the corners, and an entire closet was full of new dresses and delicate shoes. But not all that wealth could ward off the strange sensation that was beginning to take over her body. The first night at the mansion had already been difficult. Her stomach ached uncomfortably, and she barely managed to sleep. Now, sitting on her new bed, Lily felt the world spinning around her. "It's time for breakfast, little one," announced Veronica, entering the room with a tray. The housekeeper had a smile on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Arthur asked me to bring you a special smoothie to give you strength." Lily looked at the glass with the thick, greenish liquid. Something about that drink made her stomach churn even more. "I'm not hungry," she murmured, feeling a wave of nausea. "You need to eat, dear," insisted Veronica, her sweet tone masking an unsettling firmness. "Your father will be very sad if you don't have your breakfast morning." The mention of Arthur as her father still sounded strange to Lily. Even so, not wanting to disappoint him, she took the glass with trembling hands and forced down a few sips of the smoothie. The taste was bitter and left a burning trail in her throat. The following hours were a living hell. The dizziness increased considerably, and now her vision began to blur. During lunch, she could barely hold the silverware. The plate of steaming soup in front of her seemed to dance, and each spoonful was a battle against the rising nausea. "You look very pale," Arthur observed, interrupting an important call when he noticed his daughter's condition. "Are you feeling okay?" Before Lily could answer, her body was seized by a violent tremor. The spoon fell from her hand, clattering against the expensive china, and a wave of cold sweat covered her forehead. "Daddy," she whispered, the word coming out as a plea for help before her eyes rolled back. Arthur dropped the phone and rushed to support her before she fell from the chair. Lily's small body burned with fever, and her lips began to turn a frightening shade of purple. "Call a doctor, quick!" he shouted to the staff. Veronica watched the scene from the doorway of the dining room, her hands clenching her apron tightly. For a moment, a shadow of doubt crossed her face as she saw the girl suffering, but her eyes soon hardened again. "I'll call Dr. Martinez," she said, her voice controlled. The doctor arrived in less than half an hour, but for Arthur, it was the longest 30 minutes of his life. He carried Lily to her room, changing cold compresses on her forehead while waiting, his heart aching as he saw her writhe in pain. "I've never seen anything like it," declared Dr. Martinez after a thorough examination. "The symptoms are confusing. They could indicate several different things. We need to do more detailed tests." Other doctors were called. Renowned specialists examined Lily, collected blood samples, asked dozens of questions, but none of them could explain what was happening to the girl. The fever wouldn't break, even with the strongest medications. Her legs began to lose strength. And soon she couldn't get out of bed anymore. Her once rosy face was now pale as wax, marked by deep dark circles. Arthur spent sleepless nights, sitting beside Lily's bed, holding her hand as she deliriously raved with fever. "Please, honey, hang in there," he whispered, tears streaming down his tired face. "I can't lose you, too." In her lucid moments, Lily perceived shadows moving through the room. Worried voices discussed in hushed tones, and the sound of medical equipment became constant. But there was something else, something that her feverish mind desperately tried to understand. On one of those endless nights, when the pain in her stomach was almost unbearable, Lily saw Veronica silently entering her room. The housekeeper changed the IV bag on the equipment next to the bed, her hands moving with calculated precision. For a moment, their eyes met, and Lily felt an icy chill run down her spine. There was something in Veronica's eyes, something that went beyond the concern of a dedicated employee. It was a look that carried a story of pain, of loss, of a hatred, cultivated for years. But before Lily could understand what she was seeing, a new wave of pain hit her, and she plunged back into the darkness of unconsciousness. Outside the room, Veronica paused for a moment, her hand clutching a small vial hidden in her uniform pocket. The voices in her head gave her no peace. The voice of her son begging for help, the voice of the doctors saying they couldn't do anything without money, Arthur's voice years ago, coldly denying the loan that could have saved an innocent life. "Soon, very soon," she murmured to herself, a sinister smile forming on her lips as she heard the groans of pain coming from Lily's room. "You're going to feel what it's like to lose someone you love, Arthur." Lily's condition worsened every hour. Her small body, already naturally fragile, visibly wasted away under the silk sheets. Doctors came in and out of the room with increasingly worried expressions, whispering among themselves about symptoms that didn't make sense and test results that contradicted each other. Arthur had transformed one of the rooms in the mansion into a veritable intensive care unit. Expensive medical equipment was installed, nurses rotated in shifts, and a small pharmacy was set up with all sorts of possible medications. Money was no object. He would spend his entire fortune to save his daughter. "The tests show a progressive deterioration of the organs," explained Dr. Rodriguez, the latest specialist called in to assess the case. "It's as if something is slowly poisoning her body, but we can't identify the substance." The word poisoning echoed in Arthur's mind like a funeral bell. He watched Lily's sleeping face, her cheeks once rosy now sunken and pale, her lips dry and cracked by the constant fever. How could this be happening? "I want you to test everything," he ordered, his voice trembling with exhaustion and worry. "The food, the water, the medications, every drop of IV fluid that enters her body. We can't waste any more time." While the medical team raced against time, Veronica maintained her seemingly impeccable routine in the mansion. She supervised the other employees, took care of the organization of the house, and personally prepared Lily's meals, always with that same controlled smile on her lips. On a particularly difficult afternoon, when Lily had a seizure that frightened everyone, Veronica was in her room in the back of the mansion. Sitting on her simple bed, she held an old yellowed photo, the image of a small boy with bright eyes and an innocent smile. "You suffered like this too, my son," she whispered to the photograph, silent tears streaming down her aged face. "You also writhed in pain while I watched helpless, unable to afford your treatment." Her hands trembled as she opened a drawer in the dresser, revealing a collection of small and discreet vials. Each contained a different poison, carefully chosen to cause diverse symptoms and confuse any investigation. It was a plan meticulously orchestrated during years of silent planning. In Lily's room, Arthur held his daughter's hand, feeling it colder and weaker each moment. He had visibly lost weight in recent weeks, his expensive clothes now too loose on his worry-consumed body. His grey hair was disheveled, and deep, dark circles marked his face. "Daddy!" called Lily in a moment of lucidity, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared." "Don't be scared, honey," he replied, trying to smile despite the tears threatening to fall. "I'm here. I won't let anything bad happen to you." But something very bad was already happening, and would continue to happen as Veronica carried out her macabre plan. During the early hours of the morning, when everyone was asleep, she crept through the mansion's hallways like a shadow. She added drops of her poisons to Lily's IV drip, contaminated her food with substances that the doctors would never think to look for. The mansion's staff began to notice changes in Veronica's behavior. She, who had always been reserved, now seemed even more distant. She spent hours locked in her room, and sometimes her raised voice could be heard, as if she were talking to someone who wasn't there. Maria, one of the oldest cooks in the house, was the first to notice something strange. One morning, she found several empty vials in the trash can in Veronica's room. When she questioned her about them, the housekeeper reacted explosively, threatening to fire her if she continued snooping around. The incident left Maria uneasy. She began to pay more attention to Veronica's movements, especially when the housekeeper insisted on personally preparing Lily's meals. There was something sinister in the way she handled the food, something that made Maria's instincts scream that something was very wrong. On a particularly hectic night, when Lily had another severe crisis, Maria decided to investigate Veronica's room. Taking advantage of the housekeeper being busy with the doctors, she sneaked into the room. What she found made her blood run cold. Hidden under a loose floorboard, there was a diary. The pages were filled with obsessive handwriting, detailing a revenge plan against Arthur. Maria read in horror about how Veronica blamed her boss for her son's death years ago, how she had planned every detail of her revenge, how she was slowly poisoning Lily to make Arthur feel the same pain she felt. Trembling, Maria put the diary back in its place and left the room. Her heart beat erratically as she thought about what to do with that information. If she told Arthur, Veronica would certainly deny everything, and who would believe the word of a simple cook against the trusted housekeeper? Meanwhile, in Lily's room, the girl fought against another night of fever and delirium. In her confused dreams, she saw a dark figure approaching her bed, pouring something into her IV drip. She wanted to scream, to warn her father, but her voice wouldn't come out. The night wore on, and with it grew the tension in the mansion. Maria, tormented by what she had discovered, couldn't sleep. Veronica, in her room, prepared another dose of her poison. Arthur, sitting beside his daughter's bed, prayed silently for a miracle. What none of them knew was that this night would change everything. Fate was about to reveal its cards, and the price to be paid would be much higher than anyone could imagine. The early hours of the morning in the mansion were silent, except for the constant beeping of the medical equipment in Lily's room. Arthur had finally succumbed to exhaustion and dozed off in an armchair beside his daughter's bed, his hands still holding hers firmly. Maria paced restlessly through the hallways, the weight of the secret she had discovered weighing on her conscience. Each minute of silence seemed like an eternity, and every sound made her jump. She needed to do something, but fear paralyzed her. Veronica was a powerful woman within that house, and her threats were never empty. Around 3 in the morning, a subtle noise caught Maria's attention. They were footsteps, Veronica's characteristic footsteps, with her soft-soled shoes that barely made a sound on the marble floor. The cook hid behind one of the huge curtains in the hallway and watched. Veronica walked like a shadow, carrying a small leather bag. Her normally controlled face was contorted in an expression that Maria had never seen before, a mixture of pain, anger, and something close to madness. She stopped in front of Lily's room door, looking around before entering. Maria felt her heart race. She knew she needed to act at that moment. With silent steps, she approached the room door, which had been left ajar. Through the crack, she could see Veronica approaching Lily's IV drip, taking a vial from her bag. At that moment, something unexpected happened. Lily, who seemed deeply asleep, opened her eyes. Her gaze met Veronica's, and for the first time since she had become ill, she seemed to understand what was happening. "Why are you hurting me?" asked the girl, her voice weak but clear enough to wake Arthur. The businessman sat up with a start, still confused by sleep. His eyes took a few seconds to focus on the scene before him. Veronica, paralyzed with a vial in her hands, next to Lily's IV drip. "What are you doing?" he asked, his sleep-roughened voice quickly turning into an alarm tone. Veronica tried to hide the vial, but her hands were shaking. "Mr. Arthur, I was just changing the IV bag, as I always do." "At 3 in the morning?" he questioned, approaching. His eyes caught the gleam of the vial she was trying to hide. "What's that in your hand?" It was at that moment that Maria, gathering all her courage, entered the room. "Boss, she's poisoning the girl," she shouted. "I found a diary in her room. She planned everything. She's taking revenge on you for her son's death." Veronica's face transformed. The mask of the dedicated housekeeper fell completely, revealing all the bitterness and hatred she had kept for years. "You don't deserve to be happy," she shouted at Arthur. "You don't deserve to have a family after what you did to mine." Arthur took a step towards her, but Veronica was faster. In a desperate move, she grabbed a heavy lamp from the bedside table and hit him on the head. Arthur fell, blood flowing from a deep cut on his temple. Lily screamed, trying to get out of bed, but her body was too weak. The machines began to beep frantically, registering the agitation in her vital signs. Maria ran to help Arthur while Veronica, taking advantage of the confusion, fled the room. "Daddy!" called Lily, her little hands trying to reach Arthur, who remained motionless on the floor. The effort was too much for her weakened body, and she began to have another seizure. Maria was torn between helping Arthur and helping Lily. With trembling hands, she managed to reach the phone and call for emergency services. "Please, come quickly," she begged. "We have 2 people needing urgent help." The minutes that followed seemed like an eternity. Arthur's blood formed a pool on the light carpet, while Lily trembled violently in her bed. Maria did her best to help both of them, her tears mixing with the sweat of worry. When the sirens finally sounded at the entrance of the mansion, Maria felt her legs give way. The medical team rushed into the room, quickly dividing themselves between father and daughter. Arthur was placed on a stretcher, still unconscious, while the paramedics struggled to stabilize Lily. "Her pressure is too low," shouted one of the doctors. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." Maria watched helplessly as the 2 stretchers were rushed to the ambulances. In the midst of the confusion, she managed to inform the police about Veronica and her revenge plan. A search was launched immediately, but the housekeeper had disappeared into the darkness of the night. In the now silent mansion, the first rays of the sun began to enter through the windows, illuminating the scene of tragedy. Lily's room, once a sanctuary of hope, was now in complete chaos. The blood-stained carpet, overturned medical equipment, and in the air, a heavy silence that seemed to swallow everything. Maria sat in the armchair where Arthur used to watch over Lily's sleep, her hands still trembling. Beside her, on the bedside table, was a small teddy bear, Lily's favorite. She picked it up, hugging it tightly to her chest as silent tears streamed down her face. The mansion, which had already been the scene of so much suffering, now held another story of pain. And as the ambulances cut through the city with their sirens, taking father and daughter away in critical condition, a question hung in the air. Would this be the end of the tragedy, or just the beginning of something even worse? The hospital was in turmoil when the 2 ambulances arrived. Arthur was taken directly to surgery. The blow to his head had caused severe brain trauma. Lily, in turn, was admitted to the pediatric ICU, her small body fighting against the effects of the poison that ran through her veins. Maria arrived soon after, still wearing her work uniform stained with Arthur's blood. She sat in the waiting room, her hands nervously clutching the teddy bear she had brought from the mansion. The hours passed with agonizing slowness, each passing. Doctor followed by her hopeful eyes. "Mrs. Maria," called a nurse after what seemed like an eternity. "Dr. Santos wants to talk to you about Mr. Arthur's condition." The doctor, a gray-haired man with a grave expression, led Maria to his office. "The surgery was successful," he began, "but Mr. Arthur hasn't woken up yet. The trauma was severe, and the next 48 hours will be crucial." "And the girl?" asked Maria, her voice trembling. "How is Lily?" The doctor sighed heavily. "Her situation is even more delicate. The tests showed a combination of different types of poison in her system. It's a miracle she's resisted for so long. Now it's a race against time to cleanse her." Blood before her organs shut down completely. Maria felt her legs give way. She needed to lean on the doctor's desk to keep from falling. How could someone be so cruel as to poison an innocent child? Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of 2 police officers. "Mrs. Maria," called one of them, showing his badge. "We need your statement about the events of this morning. And we also wanted to inform you that we found some of the suspect Veronica's belongings at a Greyhound bus station. She tried to flee, but we managed to intercept her. The news of Veronica's capture should have brought some relief, but the critical condition of Arthur and Lily weighed too heavily on Maria's heart. She told the police everything she knew, the diary she had found, the suspicions she had, the moment of the attack. Her voice faltered as she recalled every detail of that terrible night. In the days that followed, the hospital became a second home for Maria. She alternated between Arthur's and Lily's rooms, praying, talking to them even though they were unconscious, keeping a tireless vigil. Arthur was the first to show signs of improvement. 5 days after the surgery, his eyes finally opened. He was confused, having difficulty speaking, but his first word was clear. "Lily." Maria held his hand, tears streaming down her tired face. "She's fighting, boss. Our girl is strong, she'll make it." But Lily's recovery proved to be much more complex. Her body, already weakened by weeks of poisoning, reacted slowly to treatment. The doctors did their best to reverse the damage, but some organs already showed signs of permanent damage. A week after the incident, Arthur, still in a wheelchair and against medical advice, insisted on seeing his daughter. The meeting was devastating. Lily was unrecognizable, connected to various machines, her skin yellowish and her once shiny hair now dull and brittle. "My princess," he whispered, gently touching his daughter's face. "Daddy is here. Please don't give up." The medical expenses accumulated rapidly. The specialized treatment, the imported medications, the 24-hour nursing teams, all of this began to consume Arthur's fortune. He sold his assets one by one, starting with the luxury cars, then the artwork, and finally he had to put the mansion up for sale. Maria watched helplessly as her boss sacrificed everything he had for the chance to save Lily. The man who had once been the very image of success now looked aged and dejected, his expensive clothes replaced by simple pieces, his eyes carrying a deep sadness. During a particularly difficult afternoon, when the doctors struggled to control another of Lily's crises, Maria found Arthur sitting in the hospital hallway, crying silently. She approached him, offering a cup of coffee. "You know, Maria," he began, his voice choked with emotion, Veronica got what she wanted, not through physical violence, but by making me realize how cruel I was in the past. How many other families did I destroy with my cold business decisions? How many other parents lost their children because I prioritized profit above everything else? Maria placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor that ran through his body. You're different now. The love for Lily has changed your heart. But at what price? He questioned, looking towards the door of the room where his daughter was fighting for her life. Do I even deserve to be her father after everything I've done? The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in Lily's room. The machines sounded alarms, and a medical team rushed to attend to her. Arthur jumped up, ignoring the pain of his own recovery, trying to see what was happening. "She's having a cardiac arrest!" shouted one of the doctors. "Get the crash cart!" "Ready!" Time seemed to freeze as the doctors fought to bring Lily back. Arthur, holding onto the wall for support, muttered desperate prayers. Maria, beside him, felt her own heart fail with each passing second. The monotonous sound of the heart monitor echoed through the hallway, marking the most anguishing moments that the hospital had ever witnessed. The life of an innocent girl hung by a thread, while her father, already without tears to cry, faced the possibility of losing the only light that had brought meaning to his existence. The doctors worked tirelessly for 20 minutes that felt like an eternity. The sound of the defibrillator echoed through the hallway, followed by the urgent commands of the medical team. Arthur, supported by Maria, could barely stand, his legs trembling with each new shock applied to Lily's small body. "One more time," shouted the head doctor. "Increase the charge." And then, like a miracle, a faint beep appeared on the monitor, then another and another, until it established a steady rhythm. Lily's life, which for a few moments had slipped away, slowly returned. "We managed to stabilize her," announced the doctor, exiting the room with his face bathed in sweat. But this made us realize something important. During the resuscitation, we noticed an unusual reaction in her system. I think we finally understand what was causing this whole situation. The doctor explained that the cocktail of poisons used by Veronica had created a unique reaction in Lily's body. Conventional treatment wasn't working because it combated the symptoms individually, when in fact they needed a completely different approach. "We need a full blood transfusion," he explained. "Replace practically all of her blood to eliminate the toxins all at once. It's a risky procedure, but at this point, it's our only chance." Arthur didn't hesitate. "Do whatever it takes to save her, no matter the cost." The procedure was scheduled for the next day. During the night, Arthur remained by his daughter's side, holding her hand and talking to her softly, as he had done since the first day in the hospital. "You know, honey," he whispered, "before you came into my life, I was an empty man. I had money, power, but I didn't have love. You taught me what's really important. Please don't leave me. I promise we'll be happy. Even if it's in a simple house, even if I have to work day and night to support you. I just need you here with me." The transfusion lasted for hours. Each minute was torture for Arthur, who watched through the glass of the ICU as the doctors worked. Maria was beside him, praying softly, the rosary between her trembling fingers with each new prayer. Gradually, a subtle change began to happen. Color began to return to Lily's face. Her vital signs, which had previously been constantly unstable, began to normalize. It was as if life was slowly returning to her body. 3 days later, what everyone was hoping for happened. Lily opened her eyes. Her first look was directly at Arthur, who was sleeping in a chair beside her bed. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. "Daddy," she finally managed to whisper. Arthur woke with a start. When he saw his daughter's eyes open, he began to cry with joy. "My princess, you're back!" The following days were of slow but steady recovery. Lily was still weak, and the doctors explained that some after effects of the poisoning would take time to disappear. She would need physical therapy to fully recover her movements, but she was alive, and that was all that mattered. During this period, Arthur finalized the sale of the mansion. The fortune he had accumulated during years of work was now almost entirely committed to medical expenses. But contrary to what one might expect, he smiled as he signed the sales papers. "You know, Maria," he said as he organized the last moving boxes, "I lost almost everything I had, but I gained something much more valuable. I learned to be a father. I learned to love truly." They moved to a simple house on the outskirts of the city. It was small but cozy, with a garden where Lily could play during her recovery. Maria, who refused to leave the family, moved in with them, occupying a small room in the back of the house. Arthur began working as an independent consultant, using his experience to help small businesses. His new job paid much less than before, but it brought a satisfaction that money had never provided. As for Veronica, she was tried and convicted. During the trial, Arthur surprised everyone by asking the judge for leniency. "The pain of losing a child can drive anyone crazy," he said during his testimony. "I cannot forgive what she did to Lily, but I understand the suffering that led her to it. May she receive the psychological treatment she needs." A year had passed since that terrible night in the mansion. On a sunny afternoon, Arthur watched Lily playing in the garden. She still limped slightly, a sequela of the poisoning period, but her eyes shone with a joy that infected everyone around her. "Daddy, look what I managed to do!" she shouted, showing a small flower she had planted weeks before, now fully bloomed. Arthur approached, admiring not only the flower, but especially the smile of his daughter. There was the true wealth that he never knew he needed, the pure and unconditional love of a child. Maria, who watched the scene from the porch while preparing afternoon coffee, smiled emotionally. The tragedy that almost destroyed that family ended up transforming it into something stronger and truer. Money and luxury had given way to something much more precious, a genuine love between father and daughter. In that simple house, with a flowered garden and a table always set for afternoon coffee, Lily finally had what she always wanted, a real family. And Arthur, the man who once only cared about money and power, discovered that true wealth wasn't in material possessions, but in the smile of his daughter and the peace of a home built with love. "You know, Daddy," said Lily as she watered her, "flowers. Even though we don't live in that big house anymore, I'm happier here." Arthur hugged his daughter, feeling his heart overflowing with love. "Me too, honey. Me too." And so, under the warmth of the afternoon sun and the scent of the flowers in the garden, father and daughter celebrated not only the life that had been saved, but above all, the love that had been born from the ashes of a tragedy. The love that proved to be stronger than hate, more valuable than any fortune, and more powerful than any poison.